This is Art 154, Lecture 6 on Materials. So here's a sample file, and basically you can download this from Angel and use it. First thing we want to do is set up the camera for this. So if I choose perspective, I can do show save frame, and I can use my shortcuts to slowly set this up and get it in the ballpark. When I have something I like, I can do create camera from view, and now I have this locked and set and I can see it. Next thing I want to add is I want to add a light, because right now we just have a default light. So I will add an omni, and I will put that omni inside of, let's get it, inside a light bulb right here. Okay, so let's render and see what we got at this point. Okay, camera, lock, render again. Okay, there we go. So we got the basics. Now, currently this isn't casting any shadows. If we turn it on later, and we'll play around with this and go to cast some shadows, now you can see I'm only getting the top half versus the bottom half. We're going to hold off on that because we want to wait till we're getting the proper material on the lampshades to actually do that. So for the time being, we'll keep it off. And then I'm going to add a fill light. And I can just basically just copy this light, drag, shift, and this will just be a fill light. Now obviously we could spend more time doing this properly. This is more just to get the basic lighting setup that works. Let's render this again, see if it's a little too bright. Come in, intensity color, let's knock this down to 0.5. And let's render again, and that looks a little saner. It's still a little blasted out, but it's okay. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to learn about adding materials. The first material we're going to add, well, to show you where the material settings are, you go to rendering and then material editor, and there's compact material editor, which is the classical 3D Max version, and then there's the slate, which is more node based, more like what you would use in Maya or some of the other 3D modeling programs. So we'll pull up compact, and you'll see we have a bunch of different swatches. And if you want to cycle, if you hit the X key, or if you go into options, you'll see you can increase and decrease the number of previews that you actually see. You have 24 preview slots at any time, but there's no limit to how many materials you actually have. So what you see and what materials you have might be slightly different. Just keep that in mind. So the very first material we're going to do is pretty simple. We're just going to add something to the walls. So we'll just basically, the first swatch is already selected, so we will rename this wall. And blend, basically we'll talk about this. Each material, you have the type of material it is. You have the shader, which is basically how the specular highlight, the little shiny point, gets rendered. And then you have basically different basic settings depending on what you're doing. We're going to work with standard, and also there's another one that is called ray traced, which we will work on a little later. So you can see right there is ray trace, so that's the other one that we'll look at. There's a whole bunch, but those are the only two that we're actually going to use. So at this point I can click the little swatch for diffuse. Now diffuse is the name of the surface that is basically in the light. Ambient is in the dark. And you can see right now these are linked, so basically whatever you have in the shadows and then the highlight is the same color. The more light, the closer you get to 100% illumination, the closer you get to this actual color. So we'll pick any color. I'll just do a basic blue. So you can see I have that set up, hit OK. And then hold down the left mouse button and literally just drag this and assign it to the material. Now if you render out, now we have a blue wall. So that's really simple, but that's kind of the basics of materials. And then what comes after this is basically just doing the formula of basically finding recipes of different types of materials that you can use. So let's go to the next one. We'll create a new, we'll select a new, and we'll call this paper. And we're going to go in and we're going to change the shader just so you can see how some of these behave. The ordinary blend, generally you would use this. You can see it's a little splotchy. You can adjust the rustiness. If we go up to 100%, it gets a little splotchier. If we do 50%, which is its default, which is fine, it'll go back. And this is helpful for flesh or paper or fabric or something where you want a little bit of pattern but not too much. So we will basically give this a simple tan color. I'm going to kind of make it look like parchment. That's kind of my thinking. So I'll slide that around, decrease the saturation a little, and go with that. Okay, so we have our basic setup. As far as specular level, paper does have a little bit of shininess, and we haven't talked about this yet, but here's your specular, and if I dial this up, you'll see how now there's a shiny point. The higher I do it, the brighter it is. And basically the specularity has a couple things. The specular level, which is the amount of light reflection you have. That's the first one. The second one is glossiness. That controls how soft or how hard the edge is over the size of the highlight, and then this controls the edge. I usually just leave soften alone and just work with the two. The thing to remember is the higher the level, the brighter it is, and the higher the glossiness, the tighter versus the wider it is. So those are your two controls that you basically have to work with. So that's back to 30. And glossiness, I think I have that set around 10. Okay, so we'll take this and we'll assign this to the paper. Oh, now it accidentally assigned it to the wall. So if we come down and hang out and hover a little, now you can see right now we're just getting the wall. So a couple of different ways we can do this is I can come in and I can select the paper, and then I can right click over go to material, assign to selection, and then I can do the same thing of coming in and grabbing the other items in the walls. There we go. Material, assign to selection, and finally let's get the last one, paper 3, material, assign to selection. Okay, so let's render this out. See what we get. Okay, now this might not look like it's off, but if we actually look, some of these are going across and they're curling, and we're not seeing the other side of the paper. So what we like to do is there's an option for doing two-sided, and now if I turn this on and we render, now you see how I have the back. So let me turn two-sided off, render it, and just watch this spot, render, you can see it's gone, two-sided, render, it's on. And this is helpful for the walls that we have to mask or those types of things. So there's some different opportunities to utilize and work with that if you want. Okay, I'm going to switch this out to, well, let's just go to the next. And what we'll choose here, actually we don't really need the other levels. So let me just maximize this viewport, and let's do back to our material editor. And open it up, and we can have that hang out here. And for the most part, we should be able to just work with the two going back and forth. So next one I'm going to do is for the pencil. So I'm going to do the pencil eraser first. We're going to change that to a Fong. Now the blend generally doesn't have much of a specular highlight. The Fong has a much brighter specular highlight, and you have usually more control. And Fong is kind of a standard one, and these names are basically based on the different mathematical algorithms that are used to calculate it. So for the specular level for this eraser, we're going to do 15, and we're going to set the glossiness to 0, which is going to completely flatten it out. So it's going to put the diffuse highlight around the entire thing, and then we're going to change the diffuse color to some salmon type of color. Actually, that's pretty decent right there. And then same thing again. Now let's see if we can drag this and assign it. No, it's going to be difficult. And for some reason the wall keeps on getting selected, so this is not very helpful. Edit, select none. Okay, let's try this again. Drag over, and Control Z, and let's grab the eraser. There we go. Okay, I'm not quite sure why it's being so unforgiving about that. Usually you can just drag it. This might just be something with the screen capture software and just rendering stuff. So generally I would try it first as opposed to this process that I'm kind of doing. So now we have this flat kind of color for the eraser. Next thing we're going to do is the body. So we'll come in and we're going to do pencil body, and I'm going to do a classical, basically a bright yellow. Now, getting a good yellow is always a trick in 3D programs. A lot of times you'll have too much orange, you'll have too much green, so it might take you a little bit of time to get something that looks right that actually has a little too much green. Okay, so we got the yellow, and what we want to do with that is I'm going to make that very shiny, because usually there's like varnish or something over that, so 130. And let's see, we're going to switch that over to Fong, so we have a nicer highlight, and glossiness down to 40, so that'll tighten the highlight, and the softness we'll leave as is. So we will select the body, and we'll do material, assign to selection, render that out, and now you can see we have this shiny material that starts to show up for that part. Okay, graphite, which is basically the tip of the pencil. We'll come in and we'll just call this graphite. We'll make that a dark charcoal color. Now the other thing to remember, I think we've talked about this before, is you never want to do something pure black. So if we do have blacks in the surface, we want to make sure that this is noticeably brighter than it. Also, once we get the specular highlight on this, so we'll keep it as a blend, we'll change the specular level to 60. And now we start to get kind of a sheen. Glossiness, increase it to 20. And we'll leave the softness, like I said, usually just, actually let's change this to 0.2. Should make it a little softer. Okay, so we need to move this out of the way real quick. Move this over here. And go ahead and get the point. And assign to selected. Now you can see we have that. So now we have the point of the pencil. Now for the wood, we'll look at wood grain next class, but for the time being we just want to create the color that you would get if you blurred or you mushed out the color, if you will. So if you squint at something, you look at it, that's generally the base color. So we want to try to approximate that. So this is a pencil, wood. We'll leave it as a blend because we don't want it to be too shiny. We'll try to get kind of some yellowy orange color, low saturation yellowy orange color. So maybe get a little bit more brown on it, increase the saturation. So we can play around, get the color so you like it. Go in and we'll select the wood and make sure that that's highlight and assign to material and render it out. Now we have the tip, the wood, the eraser, the body, and the last thing we need is the little clamp or staple part on this. So let's go. So there's the clamp. Now the clamp, I'm going to show you what you don't want to do. This is basically the wrong technique. There is a shader. Now we can go down and we'll grab a new slot. We'll call this pencil metal. And there is a shader for this material called metal, but what it does is it changes the specular highlight of the surface so that it supposedly looks like metal. I really don't recommend using this at all. We'll actually look at a ray traced option. That'll be a lot better. So we'll go in, and with this we'll just keep the diffuse light gray, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to adjust the specular level to 100. And you can see the instant I do that, all of a sudden it changes optically what happens and switch the glossiness to 2. And you can see that this kind of creates the illusion of some type of metal. We have that highlighted, we have the clamp, material, assign to selection, and render this out. And now we start to get something that's a little shiny. It's trying to simulate reflection. There isn't really a true reflection or anything with this. That's not how that works. I'm just going to save this real quick just to make sure that got everything save as 06 001 start. Okay. And let's look at ray trace materials. So at this point we haven't done this, but just briefly talked about it. So a ray trace material does what it says. It basically causes the rays or light waves to bounce around, and it actually traces or calculates